Thank you, everyone, for coming. I'll go ahead and call this February 12th, 2024 Public Safety Committee hearing to order. We only have one real substantive docket item, but first I will request the approval of the minutes of the October 2nd, 2023 and October 6th. I guess we should probably do them in separate motions. So do I have a motion to approve the October 2nd, 2023 minutes? So moved. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And do I have a motion to approve the October 16th, 2023 minutes of the Public Safety Committee? Second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, next we have what is the culmination of a lot of work, and I'm excited to share with my colleagues. So I believe back in 2022, Council appointed me to be the representative on the Active Transportation Plan Task Force. Working with the Planning Department, lots of different departments in City Hall, the schools, Bike Lakewood, lots of other interest groups came together to create the Active Transportation Plan and the Safe Streets for All plan. So the resolution before us, which was entered into the council docket on December 18th of last year, is to basically adopt the Active Transportation Plan and the accompanying Safe Streets for All plan. It's resolution 2023-73. Just so we have a feeling for how this will go, is I believe the administration and our consultant Toby will give about a 20 to 30 minute presentation overviewing both plans, and then I'd like my colleagues to ask whatever questions they'd like to know from the plan, and then also take some public comment, maybe a little truncated on the public comment, not the whole 5 minutes, but would be interested in what folks have to say. So I guess I'll throw it over to Director Leininger or the Mayor, or Dave Boss, to get us started.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of council. We're excited to be here. And we were excited a couple years back when we were selected for this opportunity by ODOT to get the development assistance. We were one of the few cities that did get selected when they were starting this development assistance to help you develop an active transportation plan, which for us at the time, it was very timely and appropriate, as we were already looking to how we could update our safe routes to school and our bike master plan, which were both at the 10-year or older mark. And so it has been a lengthy process. But I do want to just recognize and thank Tool Design, Toby, and the team here that for all of their work over the last about 18 months or longer that we've been going through this. And I also want to thank our stakeholder group and kind of that core group that we worked. We had 20, my last count, 21 members of our stakeholder group that spanned kind of the administrative departments, the school district, ODOT, and even reaching out to Lakewood Catholic Academy, NOACA, Bike Cleveland, Bike Lakewood, Lakewood Alive, the Chamber of Commerce, and we had a resident representative as well. And so the intent, I think, as you mentioned, Mr. Chair, tonight we've got this presentation we'll work through here. And so I guess without further ado, I will have Toby from Tool come on up and walk through this, the two plans that we have.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, council members and folks that came out tonight. My name is Toby Otulana. I'm a project planner at Tool Design in the Columbus office. And like Dave said, been working on the Lakewood Safe Streets for All and Active Transportation Plan. So I'm going to walk through this presentation. It's a high-level overview of the draft Active Transportation Plan and Safe Streets for All Safety Action Plan. And then I can go back to slides that you want to look at. We can move around the presentation for discussion as needed. All right. So just to re-acknowledge the project team that was mentioned, we had a core project team which consisted of folks from City of Lakewood, across departments, Lakewood City Schools, and the Ohio Department of Transportation. And then we had a larger stakeholder team, and that core team was meeting monthly to guide this process. And then the larger stakeholder team that met a few times throughout this process also to make sure we were getting that cross-agency and input from across the community as well. Next slide, please. So the plan elements in the draft active transportation plan, which is really just a table of contents listed here. So the elements that you'll see are the executive summary. That's a good place to start if you want to get a sense of the overall process and the key recommendations. But then there's a community engagement chapter, which details the different community engagement activities and groups that we talked to, as well as the key takeaways from the folks that we talked to across this process. We have an existing conditions chapter, which looks at the network analyses. So we did a number of analyses that were based off of the existing conditions, and that really helped inform the recommendations in the proposed projects and programs section, where it details the infrastructure recommendations, and then there are a number of program and policy recommendations as well, just to have that holistic approach to improving active transportation. Then we have the priority projects chapter. We used a data-based prioritization to categorize all of the infrastructure projects into 3 tiers of priority. And then we finished off with the implementation chapter, which identified a few considerations, things like funding, maintenance, roles, and responsibilities. This next slide is kind of a timeline, an overview of the planning process. We started off in the fall with vision and goal setting, heavily informed by that steering committee. We did community engagement around schools specifically, and then we asked folks about existing conditions, what's it like to walk, bike, and drive in Lakewood. Had a few different activities that we did to collect that information. From there, we moved into the existing conditions network analysis, so really that data-based piece of this planning process. But of course, we supplement with the community engagement because data has gaps and limitations, and so that helps us get a clearer picture of what existing conditions actually are. And then spring and summer through 2023, that's when we developed the recommendations, refined them, went back to the community with those recommendations to get input on them, did some more refining, did a prioritization process, and that takes us to implementation where we drafted the plan and hopefully moving that forward at the beginning of this year for adoption by all of you. So I'm going to walk through these elements again high level here. So starting off with the vision statement, Lakewood envisions a complete and connected network for people walking and biking that provides year-round access to local amenities, resources, and the regional bicycle and pedestrian network. Lakewood envisions a culture of respect for all roadway users and bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure that is safe and comfortable for people of all ages and people with disabilities. In addition to this vision statement, there are 4 goals identified to help guide the planning process. Those goals are safety, equity, connectivity, and livability. Next slide, please. Here's a timeline of the different engagement activities that we conducted through this process. So phase 1 is kind of referring to that existing conditions, collecting that information about what is it like to walk, bike, drive, and move around Lakewood. And then phase 2 is focused on getting feedback on the recommendations that were developed. So we did online maps, we did regular survey maps, or regular surveys that were online. We had some video interviews and some phone call interviews with interested citizens who had a specific perspective to share, like folks with vision disabilities. We had 5 stakeholder meetings across this process with that group of 21 folks that was mentioned earlier. And then we did a number of community pop-ups as well, places like Cove Community Center, Madison Park, just to catch folks where they were and get some input on the recommendations as well. The existing network analysis that I mentioned earlier, here's a slide that kind of overviews the analyses that were done. I'll walk through these. You can see some examples of them at the bottom of the slide. The equity analyses was conducted using data from the Ohio Department of Transportation. They have an analysis, active transportation need analyses, that's what we're calling the equity analyses, and also an active transportation demand analyses. So they're pretty similar, but they kind of look at what are the existing things in your community, like parks and schools, that are going to generate activity or for walking and biking, and also looked at demographic factors as well. So where are elderly folks, young folks, people with disabilities, people of color, people without cars in their household, those are the demographics that we know from research are more likely to need active transportation and also to need to make sure that, those folks have safe access to all types of transportation as well. We also took a look at streetlight data to review where walking and biking is happening in your community. Streetlight is a big data source, so like pulls from your cell phone data to see, if you use Strava when you go on a run, Streetlight collects that and helps inform some decision making. So again, not a perfect measure. We know not everyone uses Strava when they go on a run, but can be helpful for understanding where there is more walking and biking activity and where infrastructure or policy and program recommendations can be most impactful. We did a descriptive crash analysis, so that was looking at the past 5 years of crash data for the active transportation plan that was focused on walking and biking. For the safety action plan, we looked at all crashes that were happening and looked at the trends. What time of day were those happening? What were the road conditions? What were the weather conditions? And that's kind of the information that came out of the descriptive crash analysis. We looked at level of traffic stress for bicyclists and also for folks crossing the street. A level of traffic stress analysis is a set methodology that's used by ODOT and other communities to understand how stressful is it going to be for you if you're an average cyclist, you don't love cycling in the road with cars, but you don't mind riding on a trail or on a neighborhood street. How stressful is it going to be on a scale of 1 to 4 for you to bike on a particular roadway? And that we use data like posted speed limit, the volume of cars on that road, whether or not there's a bikeway, to make some inferences about how comfortable that's going to be. And then similar with crossing the street, we use available data on roadway characteristics to determine if you're an average person, maybe you're with someone that's really young or with someone that's elderly, how comfortable is it going to be for you to cross the street? And then the last analysis that we did was a systemic safety analysis, and this again ties back into the safety action plan. So it looks at the descriptive crash analysis, existing crashes that are happening, and also does some statistical modeling based off of roadway characteristics where crashes might occur. So it kind of combines those two pieces of information, and then we again look at where crashes are occurring and kind of overlay those multiple maps to identify a high-risk network. Excuse me. All right, next slide, thank you. So here is a map of our recommendations. I'm sure we'll come back to this map at some time this evening. But here are the infrastructure recommendations that were identified as part of this active transportation plan process and refined through stakeholder input and community engagement. And then here's another chance to refine those recommendations now. We identified 21 miles of on-street bikeway, so that's things like bike lanes or buffered bike lanes that are happening in between the curbs. And 60 crossing improvements across the city. And then 5 miles of shared use path or trail is another term you might hear for that type of infrastructure facility. So on the map you can see the different types of infrastructure that were recommended and the crossing locations as well. Next slide, please. In terms of non-infrastructure recommendations, we identified kind of 2 categories, the first being active transportation policy and program recommendations. So that is things like looking at existing policies in place around maintenance and reviewing those for opportunities to improve that, to improve pedestrian and bicycle safety. We recommended establishing a complete streets policy, which really helped guide the city's decision-making and city staff decision-making around when opportunities come up for transportation improvements, how to make sure that you're coordinating with this active transportation plan and considering safety for all roadway users. We recommended strategies to improve equity in both the process and outcome of transportation decisions and who's involved in those. And then a few program-related recommendations. These are things that the city can do to help encourage or educate walking and biking activity or support walking and biking activity. So things like aligning with the work that's being done with the ADA transition plan, making sure that there's that coordination happening there. Building on the city's existing efforts like the bike rack program and developing a more established bicycle-friendly business program or a bike library program. And then coordinating with schools and other organizations or other key partners like Cove Community Center to implement activities specifically for different populations. For example, we heard a lot from folks at the Cove Community Center who are seniors there that they would like to see some programs specifically for them. So there's some of those types of recommendations that are captured in this section. Next slide, please. And then the Safe Routes to School recommendations are focused solely on, improving and addressing active transportation at schools. I don't have to tell all of you that there are a lot of kids that walk and bike in Lakewood, and as part of this process, the ODOT-funded active transportation plan, this plan does make you eligible for going after ODOT Safe Routes to School funding, and there's infrastructure funding for that and non-infrastructure funding for that. And so these recommendations could be eligible for that non-infrastructure funding. So it's things, again, that are already in progress, some of them, like establishing a walk and bike to school day, but also on the policy side, kind of evaluating arrival and dismissal policies and looking if there's opportunity there to better support active transportation and kids' movements, establishing a Safe Routes to School program and some funding for that, and then also establishing a helmet program and elementary or educational materials for elementary and younger students as well. Sorry, lots talking. Getting close to the end of the active transportation overview here. We have the priority projects. So I mentioned we did a database project or project prioritization. We looked at the criteria that you see on the screen here, how close a project was to points of interest that we heard from the community are important to them to be able to access by walking and biking. We looked at that ODOT active transportation need and demand data that I mentioned earlier. Safety and comfort was informed by the level of traffic stress analysis and also the crash analyses that we did. We looked at where are the opportunities for plans that are already happening. So you've done a number of studies with your neighboring communities, making sure that there's alignment there, looking to see when ODOT is already planning to do work based off of the district work plan. And so that falls into that plan and project synergy criteria. We looked at network connectivity, again, kind of going back to those goals that were outlining or guiding the process. So prioritizing projects that helped create that active transportation network across the city. And then use the web map to inform community input and make sure we were also kind of reinforcing what the community wanted to see here. And then we looked at relative cost. So just keeping in mind that different types of infrastructure have different price tags attached to them, and putting a little bit of weighting towards that in the project prioritization. So on the map, what you see in green is shown as priority 1, blue is priority 2, and purple is priority 3. And we phrase it this way: there's no low priority projects or bottom priority projects. When you go after funding, you can indicate which priority level it is, but also, there's that understanding that projects will come up based off of lots of different factors. And so hopefully you're prepared to use this active transportation plan as a guide whenever a potential project comes up and coordinate. Next slide, please. And the next slide just shows the 60 intersections that we identified. Those were similarly categorized into 3 priority areas. Next slide, please. And then last chapter in the active transportation plan was implementation considerations. So we started by looking at roles and responsibilities. There's lots of recommendations in the plan, so kind of a starting point for thinking about who is responsible for moving those recommendations forward. Different departments of the city, but also partners like Bike Lakewood who might help implement some of those policy and program recommendations. Funding strategies, ODOT kind of keeps a list or a list of opportunities that can provide funding for some of these, and that aligns well with the Safe Streets for All action plan and elements there as well. And then there's some guidance on maintenance strategies for different types of bikeway facilities, especially thinking about that statement in the vision about Lakewood being similar to walk and bike year-round. And then last but not least, ongoing monitoring and evaluation, just some guidance on performance metrics that the city can use to say, hey, this is what we said we wanted to do with the active transportation plan. Are we moving towards that goal? All right. I'm going to keep going and overview the safety action plan.
If I could, Mr. Chair, just make one comment before we jump
Sure.
onto that, just based on, as we've been going through this, Mr. Chair, and the members of the committee, folks get, and rightfully so, we get fixated on infrastructure. You kind of lose sight of the program sometimes in terms of the infrastructure, because that is the, oftentimes is the focus of a plan like this and a focus of the majority of the resources that have to go into implementing a plan like this. And as a planner, you wrestle with kind of in a planning process, looking at things through an unbounded lens in terms of requirements and what's ideal versus what's realistic. And that is one of the fundamental challenges, especially in an effort like this in a built-out city like Lakewood, with restricted rights of way and all those things. And I really do want to highlight the input of our stakeholders, especially Bike Lakewood. And this last week we had it was a really key conversation last week at Tuesday's stakeholder meeting about the importance of reconciling that level of traffic stress at the current kind of level from the analysis that's there on our high-risk network versus the infrastructure that's recommended on those routes. And ideally, you would want the recommended infrastructure to mitigate that level of traffic stress and bring it down to that kind of all ages, all abilities effort. And that's our intent as well. The balance with that is those, when you start to look at it through the existing conditions, the characteristics of the roadway, the resources that are available, there's often a gap between that. And so what we're working through right now, and I should have prefaced this at the beginning that this plan is under review. We're going to make revisions to it. We're making changes. We're still taking recommendations to this. But what I don't want people to get super fixated on the infrastructure recommendations for every single one of those routes out there, because that is one of the key things I think that we're kind of going back through when we're looking at those recommendations versus the level of traffic stress versus stakeholder and other recommendations in there. And we may end up caging those recommendations in kind of a spectrum, especially along some of the very specific high stress and the high risk network in there. Having a base recommendation, which may mirror what's in those recommendations, and that is more of kind of the realistic based on existing rights of way and available resources, but also capturing in this plan that unbounded requirement and that kind of more visionary look at some of our corridors is that, if nothing was an object, what would you put on this corridor to make that ideal infrastructure to bring that level of traffic stress down to fit that all ages and all abilities intent and kind of that vision statement up front. We're calling that the objective requirement. And so kind of having those two kind of flexible recommendations, if that makes sense, that's something that we're working through right now on some of those corridors. And so I wanted to throw that out there before we jumped to Safe Streets for All, because it is something that we intend to move forward with, that kind of a twofold for some of those corridors, the more difficult corridors, but also the more critical corridors to get the right infrastructure in there so that we capture a base or a base recommendation, but also that objective recommendation that if resources are available, if something else changes and conditions change, that it's in the plan that visionary kind of thing that if it becomes feasible in the future and the project avails itself, then we can hopefully jump to that objective requirement. But that base is also captured in there based on current circumstances, if that makes sense. So.
Yeah, and if I could, and this has been on my mind as we had lots of active stakeholder input last week, a lot of input. So do you, process-wise, what is the administration envisioning here? That this stays in committee while you finalize the plan, or that we send it to council floor and have a full plan? I mean, because what's in front of us now is the draft plan, and as I understand it, the draft plan is still being changed. So I'm curious as what your vision is here.
I think we're working through those changes now. I think that's, and so the intent would be to get you an updated version pending. I know we're going to get other recommendations and other comments, and so this is a living document that's got to work through here. So if we need another committee meeting or whatever to capture those requirements, I just want to get that out there before, so we don't get super fixated on those recommendations as they are right now and start tearing them apart, because honestly, we've been through that. I mean, and you've sat through those meetings, and so it's a work in progress, rightfully so. So that's all. I don't want to take any more time before we jump, so that we can get through the SS4A presentation and then open it up if that's your intent, Mr. Chair. So.
Great, thank you. All right, I'll do a similar walkthrough of the Safe Streets for All action plan. And the purpose of this
include and not include. So my question really is there, and have you seen in other communities, is there a role for council in terms of having things prioritized or implemented instead of sitting on the shelf? Or have you seen that, and what would you recommend?
Yeah, great question. I'm a huge advocate for complete streets policies. That's a structure that works pretty well for a lot of communities. It doesn't have to be a complete streets policy, but really integrating your active transportation plan into policy that council adopts is a great way to kind of ensure that it's not just because of great folks that care about this that are engaged in the city staff and in council that they're here, that they're moving forward, and if there's a change, that kind of not motivation, momentum goes away. But complete streets policies are a great way. You can specifically call out, this is how we're going to prioritize our projects. Complete Streets Coalition has great guidance on that. Also, Cuyahoga County, I know they get CHC funding. They also, do a lot of complete streets work. NOACA has supported complete streets policies. So actually listing out your active transportation plan or your safety action plan, saying we are going to make sure when projects come up by whichever process, that we consult this document and we do our best to align with this document. That directs policy. You can't, it's hard to fight that or say that I don't have to think about that if a developer comes up or whatever the case is. So that's really what I would recommend. But you could just do that as a resolution as well. If complete streets policy is not, if it's not the right time to do that, you could take similar language that people use in complete streets policies and pass that as a resolution. That's another option.
No, I think I know what a complete streets policy is, but can you explain it kind of like soup to nuts? So
Sure.
we all understand it.
Yeah. So complete streets policy, terminology comes from the National Complete Streets Coalition, which is out of Smart Growth America. And it's a policy that has 10 elements. I don't think I could probably list all 10 elements off the top of my head, but some of the key elements really is about developing a process for how you make decisions about your roadways. So some of the key elements are saying our roadways are going to serve all users. For some communities, it makes sense to really emphasize certain users, like we're definitely going to be focusing on pedestrians and cyclists. For other communities, it's a little bit more neutral in that language. One of the elements of complete streets policy is project selection criteria. So setting out, this is our process for how we're going to select projects every year when we have our budgeting process. It could be data-based, it could be these people are going to get in a room and make the decision, but setting out a specific process. It calls out design guidance, so calling out best practices like saying we are going to use design guidance from the Ohio Multimodal Design Guide. We're going to follow design guidance or decision-making based off of the active transportation plan. That's an element as well. And then there are some other things like coordinating with land use policy. You can highlight opportunities for interdepartmental coordination. They have performance evaluation. How are we tracking if we're even doing this complete streets policy? And then there's an exceptions. That's another key thing that often takes a lot of time to work through for communities. What are the conditions and what are the steps we have to take to get an exception from this complete streets policy? So you have to opt in or you have to opt out rather than having to opt in.
Council President,
Thank you. So there's so much great information in here, and thank you for the presentation. I had a question. I noticed in the active transportation plan, the steps moving forward, number 4 is talking about the barrier-free and inclusive design plan and mentions working with the ADA transition plan. And I think a lot of the work on this plan was happening sort of concurrently with some of the ADA transition plan. So I don't know if that's a question for you or Assistant Director Boss or who, but, and I noticed that there are in some of the detailed listings, curb cuts and various things like that, but is that part of the sort of current revisions happening of kind of trying to marry these two plans, or where is that in the process? I don't know who best to answer that.
So the two plans absolutely do come together. The ADA plan has its own priorities based on whether it's a facility within a right-of-way or whether it's a city facility, as in City Hall or a park. There need to be some coordination between the two plans. Certainly, there's going to be a lot of points where they intersect and they come together. There'll be other points where maybe there's going to be some things that are a priority in one of these plans, where it's maybe not necessarily a priority in the ADA and vice versa. But ultimately, with any plan that the city adopts, our job as the administration is to go through and evaluate each one as we're going through and setting our capital improvement project priorities moving forward, and making sure those elements that are appropriate and can be incorporated are incorporated into the overall plan side.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. So it seems like it's an awful lot to manage. It seems like to balance all of those things. So that's I was just wondering, making those decisions kind of we're touching this street for this project and we're touching this street for this project is how is. And it's okay if we don't know, but I'm just like, how is all of that tracked and managed? That seems like a lot.
Yeah, there's project managers, multiple project managers are involved in each project, and when you break it down, when you look at all these plans combined, yes, there's hundreds of recommendations in each one of those plans, but the reality of it is there's 5 or 6 street projects at any given time, maybe a couple of water projects that are going on in the city at any given time, and so it's not. Well, we have to know generally what's all in those plans. We don't have to. We can stay singularly focused on those projects that we're working on for that given year. And sometimes, when we go and set those projects, we can also look to those plans and get some guidance as far as, okay, we're between these several projects. The ADA plan has these recommendations, the Safe Streets for All, ATP, maybe it's climate action, maybe there's some other plans that are involved in these. We can look to those to, even at the higher level, to help set some project priorities as we move things forward. But yes, it is a lot, but there's a lot of people involved in our projects, and when we look at them individually, it's much more manageable.
Councilperson Rader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Atalana, for being here tonight and coming down from Columbus to share this with us, and kudos to the administration. This is a phenomenal sort of team effort. On the active transportation plan, I really do like this rubric. I like how we're putting a lot of emphasis on obviously the proximity and making sure these routes go somewhere, connect the right people to the right things, right? That's what it's all about. But also equity being super important, and also safety and comfort. That all comprising 60% of that rubric makes a lot of sense. You go down the list, and towards the bottom is cost. Obviously, cities think a lot about cost. But I'm getting the sense that this table is also prioritized, and in which projects are at the top of that list, I would guess would be the highest ranked. Yeah, okay. So the top 3 too, which makes a lot of sense to me, would be that are at the top of the list: the Clifton Boulevard, protected bike lanes, buffered bike lanes on Hilliard, and then the rail path, which I think a lot of people are really excited about. At the risk of sort of running afoul of David Boss's sort of comment in the beginning about getting too in the weeds about projects, right off the bat, how is the administration sort of looking at these priorities, which I think are very carefully laid and have a lot of, I think, community input, when we do start sort of getting down into what's going to be actualized the next several years? And totally understand, when we do bunts, that's going to obviously, be whenever we do the road, that's going to be the road we do, and it'll rise to the top regardless of where it is in this priority list. But then how do these priorities sort of factor into our thinking as an administration?
So from a high level, there's, first of all, there's the high-risk network. So that's our first priority, is looking at the high-risk network. Within the high-risk network, the plans also speak to putting our efforts first into those areas that are perhaps less served. So our lower income census tracts and looking at those areas. So it's really between those two elements, that's really what's trying to drive the focus in our efforts moving forward. Certainly Bunce is one of those, is part of the high-risk network. There's a few other streets that are in a high-risk network. Even when we get outside of the high-risk network, there's a lot of easy wins in the plans when it comes to a lot of the north-south connections are bike boulevards. Bike boulevards are really a lot of paint and signage that goes on the streets. So those are some of the easy things that maybe aren't necessarily the high risk, but some easy wins that we can get along the way to help create connectivity on those north-south routes that really we're kind of lacking in the community right now. There's a balance to that too, because if a street's about to get resurfaced in the next 5 years, we probably, even though it's not a huge cost, we don't want to go spend money on paint and signs on a street that's going to be ripped up relatively soon. So all of this is, again, going back to Council President Keppel's point, is a bunch of coordination and just understanding the big picture to then drive into the details of the plans.
It's great. Now, one quick follow-up on that. I'd be excited to like follow up on this plan in the coming sort of months and years to figure out like how we've done in terms of particularly equity. I think that's like a kind of a newer concept to cities in the last 10 years maybe. And I just really, again, appreciate the time and effort that our consultants and the city put into sort of building this in a way that I think works for all, towards working for all of Lakewood. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, and thank you everyone for your comments. And I will note that there were a couple online public comments that the clerk will put into the record. And also Lakewood Alive, Ian Andrews sent a letter in support of the plan. And, you know, from a high level, you know, so are we envisioning another public safety committee meeting with the final plan, or help explain that to me a little bit?
There's maybe a couple different options. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, we have so the process that we're using right now is a comment resolution matrix that have captured all of the recommendations, and this is basically, this is stemming from the last stakeholder meeting. We've got about 20 to 22 comments. Most of them have been accepted. I think the biggest one that we have to work through is that base objective. And maybe I oversold that. I don't want to make it sound as if we're totally revamping everything on here. And I'll give you an example of that, and hopefully it's not a horrible one, because it's not. I don't feel as though we're going to go through and reprioritize anything. If you want to look at the prioritized infrastructure project list, I think that was referred to earlier, and I'll just pick on the first one, Clifton Boulevard. Priority 1, Project ID 8, talks about a parking protected bike lane or a buffered bike lane on Clifton Boulevard. The parking protected bike lane might be appropriate in terms of reconciling that level of traffic stress on there. But think about everybody that has to buy off on a parking protected bike lane on Clifton Boulevard. State route, Federal Review, GCRTA. There's a couple layers of coordination that have to go into something as significant of a shift in terms of that, even though with a huge right-of-way like that. So in terms of the base, that might be an objective recommendation, that someday we want to get to that. But there is an awful lot of work between now and a parking protected bike lane or a shared use path or something that requires totally resetting the right-of-way on Clifton Boulevard as it is now. The base recommendation, and this is something that we talked about last week, might be focusing Clifton more as a transit and pedestrian focused corridor and directing bike traffic onto Lake. That was kind of the original intent of the Lake Avenue project, but potentially looking at Lake as a more, if I went to down here, Lake Avenue's not on here, it's a buffered bike lane, but would And that's kind of the existing requirement, but with Lake Avenue, in terms of its objective requirement, we want that to get to a shared use path or a separated bike lane. If you're starting to see that kind of the difference between maybe existing conditions for where we do have bike infrastructure versus if there are changes that we might want to make based on this priority list, that's what we're, and it's, so I'm not saying it's not a total rewrite in here. It's probably going to be a couple of lines within each of these projects for the ones that we want to delineate a base versus objective, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, to me at least, it's very important. I mean, one of the comments I made was raised crosswalk is like mentioned once, but there's lots of bump outs. I love bump outs, but I think raised crosswalks are, I don't mean to get in the weeds, but I think raised crosswalks are also important, particularly around schools. I was jogging at Valley Parkway in Detroit today, and there was a car, I'm 6'4", there was a car with its grill was above my head. So imagine a child walking there, right? So that's where particularly in areas of high pedestrian traffic. So that's just one example of, for me at least, this is council's opportunity to get this plan approved. And so, at least speaking as one of 7, I'd like to see what the final plan is before we approve it, because it's very important to me, and I'm sure it's very important to my colleagues.
No, we do too, Mr. Chair. And I think I had no illusions of getting this kind of pushed through in one committee meeting. I think this is the opportunity to kind of get the information out there. And as it is a living document, right, I kind of talk through some of the changes that have stemmed from the last stakeholder meeting, and an opportunity to collect more so that we can make that revision, get it right, and get it moving. So.
Cool. I do want to take public comment before we get too far, so I'll go ahead. We have some people signed in. Like I said, we had, I see Mr. Organ here. He said he couldn't make it in the public comment. He left online, but he's cleared his schedule, so I'm thankful for that. But he did leave a comment. And then, so signed up is David DeCapua to talk about traffic safety. So if you could stand up, I guess we'll do 2 minutes. And then please give your name, address, and state your comment. You got click the button.
All right. David DeCapua, and I live at 12700 Lake Avenue. That's the Winton place. I lived in Lakewood previously. In fact, my 6 children were born here. 3 of them are still here, raising families. I went away for 5 years and lived in Florida and encountered some interesting things that relate to the things that you're doing here tonight. I became the board president of our condo association on Sanibel, and we immediately became involved with protecting our senior citizens from injury, not only within the complex, but on the streets of Sanibel, where there's a lot of traffic. As I returned to Lakewood, I noticed that there's an awful lot of street activity in this town. A lot of it's pedestrian, a lot of it's bicycle. And in driving through the communities, and I do a lot of that, I noted that the bicyclists wear helmets. Is that required? Is that law, or is it just voluntary?
Yeah, I'll defer. I'm pretty sure that if you're under 18, it's required that you wear a helmet, but if you're over 18, it's not.
It's not.
Not legal, yeah.
Okay, but I discovered also is that an awful lot of the people who walk, the pedestrians, and also people on bicycles, wear outfits that are probably close to mine, dark. And in certain circumstances, they're difficult to see, and you really have to be cautious. And I had an experience where I was coming out of the Winton place where I turned right on red, legal, and I checked to see if there were headlights or traffic, and I thought I was safe, and as I pulled out, this bicycle whizzed by me, black bicycle, a guy that was, I think it was a guy, was also dressed black. And I thought, you know, what might be a real safety plus in this community, and I talked with Cindy Marks about this when I first got into town, about white at night, and that is offering the people who walk in this community, ride bicycles in this community, wear something that makes them more noticeable. And that morphed into a thought about providing bicyclists and walking pedestrians with a vest, lightweight, that would go over their coats, jackets, whatever, that had reflective tape on it. And so that headlights coming up on anybody, bicycles, pedestrian, would see that person more readily. And maybe it's, I'm a senior citizen and maybe my eyesight is not as good as it used to be, but I will tell you that I'm very careful. I've never been involved in an accident. It was my fault, hearsay. But I also think that there's an awful lot of senior citizens driving in this town, walking in this town, and children and whatever. And having this reflective vest would be a safety plus. Now, how would they be distributed? How would they be made? And I know that the Board of Education has outfits for their school guards. I would think there's a manufacturer somewhere that could make these vests. And if we could get an underwriter, one of the social clubs in town, Kiwanis, or maybe the Chamber of Commerce, or maybe the city of Lakewood, to bear the cost. I think that these items should be available through retail and possibly also maybe the Lakewood Live booths on the street festivals that you folks have frequently, and offer them for sale. I think that something that is purchased is more apt to be worn, and it would also defray the cost of the manufacture of these items. I have to believe that that there's maybe an organization in town that would like to be a part of this whole thing. And if that's the case, I'd be glad to volunteer whatever time might be needed to get this off the ground. Any questions? None.
Thank you, and I think that's part of the public education part of these plans, and we'll certainly make sure to include, I think it's like bike helmets for kids, but to your point, yes, I mean, safety reflective gear is important, particularly in the swing seasons, when it gets dark early in November,
Yeah.
and then now.
Well, there's also people that bicycle after dark in the summertime.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
And probably, and that traffic is at peril. And I was in broadcasting, and I did, years ago, I did public service announcements for my station, and I checked with the Cleveland Police Department and got all kinds of graphics to promote safe driving, particularly with alcohol during the holiday seasons. And they had all kinds of information on the people that were harmed and worse because of traffic accidents. I suspect, and I called the Lakewood Police Department to see if any kind of information like that was available. I don't know what the rate of fatalities are in Lakewood. I'm hopeful that they're very small, but I believe that these kinds of situations should be handled before somebody or somebodies are injured because they weren't seen at night by a driver on the streets of the town. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you. Next up, we have Ben Van Leer.
Hello, Ben Van Leer,
Ed.
1469 Woodward Avenue. I am on the board of Bike Lakewood, which is the volunteer wing of Bike Cleveland, the regional bicycle advocacy group here in Northeast Ohio. So I participated in most of the stakeholder meetings for the Active Transportation Plan and the Safe Streets for All plans. So first, thanks for including Bike Lakewood, myself and Emily Lindberg, and Jenna from Bike Cleveland in the process. The plan, mainly Active Transportation Plan, has a really big vision that I believe in strongly, especially the safe and connected and easy to use infrastructure for all part. I'll try not to get also hung up on the specific infrastructure part that Dave Boss mentioned earlier. There was lots of discussion at the last stakeholder meeting. I'll just say that the plan has a lot of really great data at its foundation for safety, the high-risk network, equity. I agree with it is an important part of the plan. As an advocate, I want, of course, always the best and safest infrastructure that's possible. And if there's one thing that I would ask you to consider in adopting and implementing what's in this plan is to always consider the safest and the best implementation possible. And I think there may be some way, as Assistant Director Boss mentioned, to kind of couch that in the plan with what's in the specific infrastructure recommendations. But I think we owe that to everybody as we work towards this vision of a safe, connected, and easy-to-use biking and walking network for everybody to always consider the best option possible. And Bike Lakewood looks forward to helping implement the parts of the plan that we can directly help with, like education. You know, we're in the plan, so look forward to helping with that part. And I'll finish with, in 2022, Bike Lakewood hosted a ride with some members of council to ride around some of the streets of Lakewood. I think that's the best way to really get a feel for what it's like and why most of the streets don't feel safe and comfortable for most people that would try biking on them today. So we will do another one of those rides this spring or summer, so please look for that invitation and try to make it. Well, we can certainly make something work for everybody. So yeah, look for that invitation. Please consider joining us. Look forward to seeing you on the roads. Thanks.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you for your service on the task force. And also, I think Emily hosted a ride with the task force as well. So your service is really appreciated, and to implement this plan, we're going to need you. So thank you. Josh Motor, I've met you, but I don't know if I've ever pronounced your name in a public meeting, so please correct me.
That's okay. It's Mature.
Motor.
Appreciate it. So my name is Josh Mature. I live on 1520 Cohasset Avenue. I'm a member of Bike Lakewood. Soon to be bike commuter. Really happy that I just took a job working downtown Cleveland, and I will be basically commuting straight down Detroit Avenue. But sadly, don't feel like this is going to still be a very particularly safe avenue to be commuting down. I have a 5-mile journey that is protected by nothing but paint with hundreds of 5,000-pound vehicles the entire length. Not to say that the city of Cleveland has, any better protection in their section, but I'd like to see our city do a little bit better. I read through both the active transportation plan and the Safe Streets for All plan, and I would like to echo, I think it was Councilman Shackner's questions earlier about, what assurance do we have that these plans are going to be implemented aside from just voting on them and saying that we're going to do it? We've spent the money to come up with a plan and to have some different groups come in and come together and put this together, but we don't have any necessarily person that's held accountable. I did notice that one of the recommendations that was in the plan was to publish an annual report on the city website, so I would love to see that. It's a huge request to have just an annual report on, hey, where are we at? What are the prioritized efforts? And maybe now that we're talking about reprioritizing or kind of, this is the draft, we don't have it final, we can look at what that reprioritization looks like, so that would be nice. What is the progress towards the elimination of fatal and serious crashes for both cyclists and pedestrians? That would be awesome, because I know that we were seeing, 1 to 2 a year from 17 to 21. So some of those statistics would be helpful. What are the things we're doing and what impact is that having on our community? One thing I kind of took issue with in looking at the plan, and I don't know if this is possible to bring up on the screens or not, but looking at the incident reports and the maps on pedestrian crashes and cycling crashes. If you bring those up and you look at the main corridors on those, you would see and you would think to yourself, the primary things that I want to address with this plan are to fix issues on Detroit, issues on Madison, and issues on Hilliard and Franklin, because those are the biggest incident places for cyclists and pedestrians. And if you look at what the proposed changes are in the map after you have the full list, it basically ignores those areas. all of the proposed changes are mostly bicycle boulevards, again, paint, that doesn't protect anybody, going mostly north and south. There's a little bit on Franklin Avenue from the place, from I believe it's Warren, moving east to make a buffered bike lane, which is a slight help, but at 35 miles an hour, there's a 75% chance you're gonna either die or be seriously injured in a car crash with a bicycle on that. So even a buffered bike lane, I feel, is insufficient for that area. I do very, very heavily support the parking protected bike lanes on Clifton. I know that we said that that was kind of a dream state, but you know, other areas have done it. There's no reason we can't strive to be one of those cities as well. I know that's one of the goals of the city and the council and the administration, is to be, you know, kind of an exemplary city. It was put in our bicycle master plan back in 2014 to be recognized nationally for that. So with that said, I'm glad to hear that this is just a draft. I hope that this continues to evolve and that we can be, you know, partners, Bike Lakewood, et cetera, in helping to continue to develop the plan and what we feel is the best use of that for our city. So thank you all.
Thank you, Josh. And, you know, looking into the recommendations of the plan, it does, because, you know, I think there's, Dave, you can, Assistant Director Ross, you can see him struggling with like what's implementable and what could we maybe get a federal funding grant for that can help us do everything like Sandusky got, you know, for Route 6. And I think we have to have both in this plan, because you need to have, you know, bait for federal funding to come, and then you need to have stuff that we can implement on our own without outside funds. And it does say every 10 years to update the active transportation plan. And that's something that, you know, I know if I'm on council in 10 years, I will push for that. And I'm sure the administration wants that as well. And it also keeps you in the running for the funds, right? For the federal funds, for the state funds, to get those types of things accomplished. What I will say is, you know, I thought when this project initially started, it's like, oh, great, we can be Hoboken, right? Like, we can neck down our rights of way, we can have one-ways and put bike boulevards everywhere. I think that is a vision where we might be able to get to, but that takes a lot of steps along the way. And I think this plan has gotten a really good foundation of the step along the way to getting us somewhere. It's a snapshot in time, and it's what we think is implementable in the next 10 years. And I think we go from there. I see the planning department talking back and forth, so I'm not sure if they agree with me totally, but they can let me know. And I don't think there are any more public comments, and we're already a little over time unless someone else has anything to say.
Just one thing to add, and I'm kind of surprised I didn't mention this, but on Friday, you'll have a social, right, at Beat Cycle? Yeah, so come on out. I think it'll be a topic of conversation, this plan there. Just hang out and, you know, renew your membership if you're a member of Bike Cleveland, right? So that's all. Let's go Beat Cycle, 6 p.m. this Friday.
Thank you. That's good information. So I guess would you be fine with a deferral here? I mean, I don't want to step on your process, but I want us to understand what you're looking for.
Well, it's our process, so whatever.
Yeah.
If, as Assistant Director Boss mentioned, we do have a matrix that we're tracking all of these changes. What we could do is if council prefers, we can come back at the next committee meeting. Toby won't be with us at that point, but we can at least walk through and say, here's the comments we received, and at least show you the matrix. And if we need to, we can point you in the plan and show you what those changes were, even though it'll be noted in here. Otherwise, you couldn't, the other option is you could move this ahead, and we could show this at a council meeting, but then we're taking up council general time to do that. So I think either solution is fine for us. There's not a time, we're not on a time schedule to get this done for any type of grant funding at this point. There is SS4A dollars that are out there, but we have those are out there for a few more years. So we have time.
Okay, well, as long as it's not going to put us in a bad spot funding-wise, then I think I'd prefer to defer it. And then, you know, Toby's given us a really good outline of the plan, but I think the things that we have left to kind of think about are super in the weeds, you know, with some of the comments that the task force gave. So I'd be comfortable, you know, deferring this and then talking about it at another meeting coming up. I know, you know, we've talked about speeding the school zone, so that's one thing we're probably going to come back up at public safety too. So we're going to be spending lots of time together in the public safety committee meeting. So I'll go ahead and make a motion to defer this item. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And that's it. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate everyone's time for coming out. And without objection, this meeting is adjourned.